So in this, my first video, I'd like to talk about how we get to what we have in English translations of the New Testament. So to begin, here's Jesus. See, he has a beard. That makes him Jesus. The halo helps too, I guess. So next, Jesus' 12 drinking buddies. Over there's Judas. He preferred white wine over red wine. Little known fact. So Jesus told these guys some things. He also told a bunch of other people some things, and those bunch of other people told their friends about this Jesus fella and what he said and did. I mean, when you feed over 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes with 12 baskets of leftovers, word gets around pretty quickly. So after Jesus dies and that whole business, those 11 drinking buddies who liked red wine more than white wine kept talking. Judas didn't do a whole lot of talking after the Passion. Anyway, those 11 guys and a whole bunch of other people are talking about their experiences of Jesus while he was alive and after his death and resurrection. Eventually, people start dying. So when the first generation of Jesus followers, like those 11 drinking buddies, start getting killed off, people decide it is time to write down some of the stories they had been telling. So they take the Aramaic oral traditions that had been passed down about things Jesus said in Aramaic to his 12 drinking buddies, and they write them in Greek, since that was the literary language of the time. By the end of the first century, just a few decades after Jesus lived, these written Greek stories eventually get compiled into Gospels under the names of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. By this point, of course, Paul's letters, and pretty much all the other letters and writings of the New Testament, have been written down and are being passed around through and by different communities and house churches. Definitely by the end of the 2nd century, everything in the New Testament is written and being passed around. In fact, at about this point, the Christian leaders are declaring what is and what is not canon in public declarations. This is also when we get all sorts of other strange stories written about Jesus' life, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of James, the infancy narrative of Thomas, and so on, and these other Gospels that we only have in fragments today, but at some point they're read by different communities throughout the Mediterranean world. These other Gospels were not considered by the leaders of the Christian Church to be authentically from the oral traditions of Jesus' drinking buddies. Therefore, they were not preserved for the same amount of time and the same volume or quality as the rest of the New Testament. By the end of the 3rd century, into the 4th century, at the time of Eusebius, Jerome, Augustine, and Constantine, there was basically what can be found today in most modern critical editions of the Greek New Testament, with various variations. There were, of course, many different textual traditions at this time, and modern critical editions make an effort to discern the best traditions in compiling the text. Of course, it took a good many centuries of the New Testament getting lost and found again to get to the modern critical editions. It was not until the last century that critical editions had enough manuscripts to work with for them to be considered critical by most modern standards. Many early translations of the Bible into modern languages like English and German relied on 1 or 2 manuscripts rather than the breadth of the over 6,000 Greek manuscripts on record today. In 1538, Henry VIII commissioned the first English translation of the Bible, and within a century, many more translations were published, including one from papal authority deriving from the Latin translation, the Vulgate. This, of course, was the Latin translations of the Greek translations of the Aramaic traditions of what Jesus said and did in Aramaic. In 1611, His Majesty King James I of England commissioned the Authorized Version of the Bible, which is still used today in many Protestant circles. This version, although making use of a few Greek and Hebrew manuscripts that were available at that time, is dependent on the Latin translation of the Bible. This can be seen in the use of the word unicorn, and as seen in John 3:3 with born again, both of those deriving from the Latin translations of the original Greek and Hebrew text. Modern English translations of the Bible are English interpretations of Greek texts that are 2 centuries removed from their original writing of Aramaic oral traditions of what Jesus said and did in Aramaic. This, of course, means that paraphrase Bibles are interpretations of English translations of Greek texts 2 centuries removed from Aramaic traditions of what Jesus said and did in Aramaic. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the reason not to use a paraphrase Bible.